Welcome to the latest installment of SQL Walk and Talk with Waterrocks Consulting. Probably noticed though, I'm not walking. I'm actually driving down to Richmond to talk to their SQL user group tonight. I'm going to be talking about protecting optimized indexes. One of those sessions you can go see it at waterrocksconsulting.com/webinars or waterrocksconsulting.com/videos. I do believe I have that one on video. If not, it will be there soon. Otherwise, you can check out the webinars and see when I'm going to be offering that up again. Live streaming online. But I want to take this time to talk a little bit about unknown values in SQL Server. Now, what I mean by unknown values, I mean null values. Those values that do not exist in SQL Server. So let me get settled in here, get my cruise control set, get things moving along nicely here on this nice back highway down to Richmond. On this gorgeous day, I may open the roof, may not, we'll see. And we'll get right to it. Okay, so what exactly is a null value in SQL Server? Well, what it is an unknown value. SQL Server wasn't able to find anything to tell you what this is. And what that means is that it's not a zero value, it's not a blank value, and it's not an empty string value. It is truly non-existent. SQL has no idea of what this value is. And this can start to cause some issues in your coding, be it your stored procedures or anything, but especially in your data sets when you have to do some basic functions like addition, subtractions, this kind of stuff, and there's values that may be missing. Even when it comes to putting strings together, things like putting a first name, middle name, last name together, if the middle name is null, it's kind of interesting the result sets that you get. So first things first, let's talk about how you can identify that a value is null. And there's two main phrases you're going to use in this. What's kind of nice, this is one of those few times that you get something that sounds kind of like regular English when you're figuring out if a value is null. In fact, that's exactly how you do it. You would put in the value, the variable, the parameter, the field, whatever it is you want to check, and then right after it is null. That's your check, those two words. Value is null. And that's going to go back and give you a Boolean result back, a true false back. It says, yep, it's null, or nope, it's not, you're fine, go ahead and do whatever. And you can also have with that, you can throw the word not in. So you can also say where value is not null. And that'll let you go ahead and verify the value is not null, so then you can continue on with your calculations or whatever you're doing. The problem is if you start using just those couple of statements, you can wind up with some really kind of clunky, messy code in there, because you could do case statements and say, okay, I want to take value 1 and case where it is null, case where value 1 is null, then 0 else value n, and do that all over the place. But that starts getting some clunky code. And I'm all about simple, clean code. So, it's an option to do that, but there's some better things to do. But before we get to that, what I want to do is I want to show you what that null value has as an impact on your statements and your data sets. Because again, as I said, it's really interesting. So what we'll do is we'll go over to SSMS, we'll take a look at that, we'll run a couple simple queries and show you how null affects the result set that you get from SQL Server, and how it may not react the way that you think it would, but then again, maybe it does. So one way to find out, let's go take a look. Okay, so here I am back in the office real quick so I can record these screen captures, not while I'm driving. Don't worry about it. I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. But I want to take a look here and see how null starts to affect some of the calculations that we're doing. I got my SSMS open here already, and let's go in here and take a look at this real simple query just to start with. You can see I just have a simple select statement with a couple of mathematical functions. 1 plus 1 is okay, 1 plus null, 1 minus null, 1 times null, 1 divided by null, and 1 modulo null. And I did the divide by and the modulo because it is division things. I want to show you that null is not a zero value. It's unknown, and SQL reacts a little bit differently because of that. So let me go ahead and highlight just this little section. and execute this. And we can see the result set that we get for each one of these sections. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because if we take a look here, we'll notice that, okay, 1 plus 1 is 2. Yeah, great, perfect. Now if I take 1 plus null, because null is unknown, it trumps any other values that are in that calculation. So here we can see that 1 plus null is null, and 1 minus null is null as well, because it doesn't know what that value is. Now, when you get to multiplication, same thing as addition and subtraction, it doesn't know what it is, so you get a null. What's really interesting is when you do a divide by or a modulo. Normally, if you had a 0 in here, modulo not so much, but the divide by, certainly, you have a divide by 0 error. If you had a divide by 0, you would have an error coming up saying, I can't divide by 0. But notice here, you get a null value over on the divisor part. And that's because, again, it's an unknown value. We don't know if we're dividing by 0 or 1 or 500. SQL Server has no idea of what it's dividing by. So this can kind of throw you a little bit if you're not handling those nulls correctly. So now we've seen what that actually does. Let's go ahead and I'm going to create a couple of tables here real quick. I'm going to create a customer table, just has 3 customers in it. Me, Joe, and awesome viewer. And then I'm going to create an address table as well with only 2 records in that. One of those records does contain a null value, as you see, but it also is missing customer ID number 3. Customer ID 3 is not in that data set. So let's go ahead. We'll execute that to create our 2 tables. You see we added 3 rows and then 2 rows. And let's go now to our first table. And let's select the customer ID. And then something we may do, let's say on a form letter that's going out or a report, we take the first name, middle name, and the last name, add them all together, concatenating them, to wind up getting a full name that we're going to show. This is fairly common when you're doing reports and forms that come out of systems. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. This is, again, only looking at our address table where we had the 3 customers put in. But Joe, if you noticed up top when we inserted the value, Joe's middle initial was set to null, not a blank space, not an empty string, but an actual null. So when we execute this, we can see the result set that we get here. And what you wind up with is customer ID 1 is Chris J. Bell, that is me. And then customer number 2, we get a null for the full name. Customer number 3, awesome viewer is there, number 3. But number 2 is interesting because we're not dealing with mathematical functions now, we're actually concatenating strings. And that null is again playing the role of that black hole. So Joe, null, somebody comes back to us just as null. Now, the other way that you wind up coming across null statements is when you do joins to other tables. So the next little statement I have here, let's mark this in here so we can take a look at it real quick. I'm just doing a simple select of the customer, the first name, and then their associated address. I've also thrown in a case statement at the end that says case when the zip4 is null. As I mentioned earlier, we can check to see if a value is null. So let's say if it is null, then we're just going to put the text saying we are missing the zip4. Otherwise, we're going to say the zip4 is okay. And then we're going to finish that off and just say that's our zip4 check. And we're going to do this from our customer table, but we're going to perform a left join to the address table based on that customer ID that ties these 2 tables together. Now I'm doing a left join because that will give us all the information from our customer table and any information it happens to find in our address table. And if you remember, when I created those tables just up above, we created 3 customers but only put 2 addresses in. So we will get null values back for that customer 3. So now we've taken a look at that. Let's go ahead and execute this and take a look at our result set. So what you can see here, Chris, my address, it's all there, my zip4 is okay. When we look at Joe, customer ID 2, Joe, I've got the address 123 Main Street in some town, New York, but my full zip is empty. Well, I know I put a zip code in, but it tells me here because I did that check and it says, oh, well, zip4 is null. Therefore, I put in that we're missing a zip4. And when we come down to customer ID 3, we didn't have an address for them. And this is another way that nulls can show up. I have a first name, but the address is null all the way across because the record doesn't exist. But because it was a left join that was made, SQL Server comes back and says, I couldn't find any values. They're unknown, so I'll give you nulls back. So you have to be aware of that when you're doing your joins. Inner join would have given us just 2 records back, Chris and Joe, customer ID 1 and 2, because those are the only records that were also over in our address table. Because we did the left join, we're going to get all of our customers, but we do get these extra null values, which can start to affect how things are portrayed. We wind up with these extra null values that can start to affect the output of our data and what we're putting it into, be it a report, a form, or something like that. All right, so once we've got that in there, I've just got this little code here to clean up the tables. We'll take those out and let's pop back over and talk about this a little bit. And how can we now deal with these null values and what can we do about it? All right, so were you expecting that? Nulls, you get null. Null is what I like to call the black hole of the SQL Server world. When you add it, subtract it, multiply, divide, almost do just about anything with it, or with a value that's null, suddenly everything becomes null in that record. It's like, well, that's not necessarily good. You know, imagine your financial reports and there's one field missing somewhere and suddenly that's all you can deal with, null. Everything's come back, unknown, don't know what it is. Thankfully, SQL Server gives us a couple of options of how to deal with these unknown values in our queries. There is a set ANSI null on and off, which basically means how do I treat ANSI nulls? Do I have them? Do I turn them off? Do I replace them with 0? That kind of a thing. Really don't recommend using that very often. Maybe fine one place you are, but don't get in the habit of it. You start turning that on all the time and you can actually start to affect the output of things. So you probably don't want to have that, muck around with that too much. But I'll write up some more in the related blog post to this. You can read up more about those specific settings and what they do, how they work, and how they could be useful in your situation. But let's talk about isNull and Coalesce. Now, isNull is a really nice statement the SQL Server gave us. Now, I know I already said isNull earlier. That's the actual Boolean check. Value is null, value is not null, because you can't use equal or not equal to or greater than or less than, because again, it's unknown value. SQL Server can't tell you if it's equal to the unknown value because it doesn't know what the value is. isNull instead is a function that you get, and it's isNull, all one word, ISNULL, open parentheses, you put a value in, comma, and then a value you want to be returned if the value that you're checking is null. And then you close your parentheses. And we'll go through this on a screenshot in just a little bit here so you can see what it is. So what you wind up with is with this statement that says isNull, open parentheses, field 1, comma, 0, close parentheses. And you say as dollar amount, or as price, or whatever it is that you want to do in your sample. And with that, you can now prevent those null override issues that where it takes over the entire value and force a value in if this is null. So isNull is a really nice thing. You throw it in your select statement. You can even put it down in your where clause if you like. Don't really recommend it all that often down there, but it is possible. Joins can deal with that as well. In fact, that's what you see when you do a left join to a field and the information is not in that right-hand table. You notice you get all nulls back because they're unknown values. And this is one of the ways of how you can deal with this. So we've got isNull. And that's great if I have a single value. What if I have multiple values? Let's say, well, if field 1 is null, use field 2. But if field 2 is null, I want you to use field 3. And if field 3 is null, I want you to use field 4. And so on and so on and so on. And then eventually, if they're all null, just put a 0. Maybe that's the type of check that you want to do. Well, you could nest your isNull. You can say isNull field 1, comma, isNull field 2, comma, isNull field 3. And then you better keep track of all your parentheses in that. It starts to get to be a bit of a pain in there. Or we have another function that SQL Server gives us, which is called Coalesce. Now, Coalesce lets you put an array of values in, with the final one being that final eventual value if everything is null. And it goes and starts on the left at the start of the array and continues all the way through until it finds a non-null value and then uses that. So in the case of field 1, null, use field 2 if it's null, use field 3 if it's null, so on and so on to 0. What you would put in instead of all these nested is nulls, you could just put in a simple coalesce, open parentheses, field 1, comma, field 2, comma, field 3, comma, field 4, comma, 0, close parentheses. And when that goes to evaluate itself, it's going to go look at field 1. And if that's null, then it's going to use the value in field 2, the second slot that you filled in. If that one's null, to 3, to 4, and eventually if all of those are null, it'll use 0 instead. Just a simple example of what it is. In fact, it is kind of cool how it works. So let's jump over to SSMS again. we'll take a quick look at that and see how those can help you with some of your select statements and some of the other calculations that you'd want to do. All right, so here I am. I've got my script opened up. This is my second demo script that you can download from us. And this is where we can see how isNull and Coalesce work. Now, rather than creating tables and using tables and that, I'm just going to go ahead and use a few variables, set some values, and we can see how isNull works and then how Coalesce works. Right off the bat, I'm going to come in and I'm going to use this statement I have here, which states to declare the three different variables I'm going to use, var1, var2, var3, and then add them all together. Now, by putting the =1 and =3 on var1 and var3, I'm setting a default value of 1 and 3 respectively. When I don't set a value on var2, it's going to leave it as a null. It's an unknown value at this time. So by running this, we can see what we get as a result set. So what I've got here is you can see variable 1, which I labeled as v1, came back with a value of 1, that default value we assigned to it. 2, because we didn't assign a value, came back as a null, and 3 came in as a 3. But when I add the three of those together, just like we saw before, we're going to get a null because 1 plus null plus 3 is going to be equal to that black hole of data, null. How can I deal with that? Well, let's just add in a simple statement of isNull. And the syntax again was isNull, the field that you're looking at, and then the value you want to assign to that field if it happens to be null. So I'm going to come in here, I've got the same statement, but you'll notice I've added one little change in here, and that's in the total. I kept the old total that we had above in our earlier statement here, and I've added the second one here that says var1 plus isNull var2 comma 2, so that if variable 2 is null, assign it the value of 2, and then also add var3. And this is the basic way to handle these null values. So when we execute this, we can see our result set that we have. We can see the result set of variable 1 is 1, variable 2 is null, variable 3 is 3. So the old total when we added those three together was null. But my new total, where I add that isNull statement, assign the value of 2 to variable 2 if it was null, you can see I get 1 plus 2 plus 3 gives me the 6 total that I would have. So that's one of those ways that just in your code you can use this isNull to replace those blank null values. You can see where you can replace those null values now with something that makes a little more sense. It may not be an actual value, it could have said 0 or whatever it is, depending on what your data set is and what result set you are trying to get. But this at least gives you some kind of result without wiping out all the other information. Now, taking that a step further, we have Coalesce. Now, Coalesce is slightly different than the isNull, where we can have a list of multiple values. And again, starting from the left side going to the right, it's going to start on the first value that is in the Coalesce array and continue until it finds a non-null value. So in this statement, I've got 5 variables. 1, 2, 4, and 5 are all defaulted to a null value. I've not set a default value, but on 3, I set it to 3. So when we pull the select statement, you'll see we have the 5 variables, and then Coalesce 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables, and then 99 at the very end. So if all of those are null, we should wind up with a 99. We have set our value of 3 to 3, so when we run this code, what we'll see is we will come in and we will see that we have 1, 2 are null, 3 had the value of 3, 4, and 5 are null. So when we go through the list, left to right, null, null, 3, there's my first non-null value, the 3. Doesn't get all the way to the 99 because I found an actual value. So if we take that one step further, let's take our variables and remove all the values, which is what I do in this last statement here. And we leave that Coalesce statement down there with the 99. What I would expect in this case is that because all of these are null, I should get the 99 returned. So we'll give that a quick run. And here you can see null, 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 null. There's no values whatsoever for any of our variables, but the 99 did get caught in our Coalesce statement. So there we go. There's a quick overview of isNull and Coalesce, a couple of ways for you to go and see how to handle these unknown values at a basic level. So there you have it. A couple nice simple ways that you can deal with these unknown or null values and put them into your statements, put them in your select statement, and not get that black hole effect of, oh, I've got a null value, I'm putting something with it, oh, it's null. Here's a little tip to keep in mind. Now, Coalesce is kind of neat because I can do just a 2-value Coalesce statement. I can say Coalesce field 1, comma 0, and that's going to work just like an is null statement, right? If my first value is null, then I'll finish off with a second value of 0. But here's the trick to it, is that Coalesce actually uses a little more processing power than is null when you're dealing with just 2 values. So if you're going to be using these types of checks, the is null or the Coalesce, against more than just a single value, then you probably want to go ahead and use that Coalesce. But if it's just for a single check, use that is null. It does have a minor impact on performance. You're going to get slightly better improvement on performance. It doesn't seem like much until you start working with thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of records and adding your queries. There's a few extra little milliseconds that pop in to process a Coalesce versus an is null really can start to make a difference in performance. So keep that in mind. So if you have any questions about these unknown null values that occur in SQL Server, go ahead, shoot us an email at our contact page, or leave a comment. We'll get to you and we'll put some information out there. So that's it. Hope you find some use for is null and Coalesce. Hopefully they'll work well, help you with some troubles you may have been having. And if not, you know what? It's always a good thing to have a little reminder about what SQL is actually capable of doing, so at least you've got it in your tool belt if you ever need it. So until next time, on this scenario, drive safe.